Hello and welcome back to the Career Mode Science tutorial. I'm Sabe42 and this is part 2 of the Minmus trip. We're about to land on Minmus, we're going to collect science and then do the return trip. Previously we got ourselves into this near circular orbit around 30,000 meters up, and the reason why we chose 30, partially so that it's a lower orbit, we'll be traveling faster, and because Minmus's rotation is a lot more than the moon's, the faster orbit will allow us to get to our landing spot before Minmus rotates enough to where we won't be set up anymore. So that was one reason. Another reason is we still want to be high enough out in order to do our time warp. So I believe it's around 24,000 meters. If you're above that, then you can do the 1,000 times time warp, and it just makes setting up landings and maneuvers a lot quicker. Now I'm going to align myself with a landing spot similarly to what we did on the moon, get about halfway, the opposite side of where we want to land, and we want to land in the light, so we'll start the burn on the dark side. Now the easiest places to land on Minmus are the plateaus and the dried lakes because they are perfectly flat and very easy to land on. So I'm pointing retrograde and I'm starting a burn, and we'll lower our periaps. So my target is going to be that dried lake area that is kind of to the left of where the periaps is. So I'm going to bring this down to roughly around 6,000. You got to be careful of Minmus because those plateaus are pretty high. And the different biomes though, because plateaus are a different biome than lakes, you could do one trip and land on the plateau and then the next trip land on the lake, or vice versa. So I'm going to be targeting that lake and I'll be swinging around, and by the time we get there, Minmus will have rotated a little bit, but it shouldn't have rotated too much, and since I set up the periaps a little to the right, and Minmus is rotating kind of in an easterly direction, same way that we're orbiting, we should be just fine in setting up our landing spot. Now the plan for this landing is going to be, I'm going to try to land in the middle of this lake. So because there's not that much orbital velocity, I'm just going to wait until I'm about to where I want to land. So about halfway over this lake here, and then I'm just going to do a retrograde burn off all of my orbital velocity and just come straight down and control my speed as I go through the descent all the way down. So one recommendation is to use the map view when you're looking at where you are, because just if you look at this 3D view, it could look that you're farther in than you really are, and then you actually miss the lake, even though it's really big. It's not too hard to do. I've done it a couple times. Now because Minmus's gravity is so low, this is gonna be like the moon in slow motion. So we're about halfway over now, and we'll start the retrograde burn. We'll just burn off all the orbital velocity. So one thing that is different about this landing than the moon landing is that the orbital velocity and the surface velocity are actually a little bit different. Now, because the moon rotates so slow, the orbital velocity is pretty similar to the surface velocity. However, on Minmus, they're different enough to where if you're landing in orbital velocity mode, you're going to be actually skimming across the surface when you actually get down to the surface. You have to remember to switch over. This is something that I've forgotten about right now. But first I'm going to separate the stages. If you notice how much fuel there still is left in this stage, as you can see, it's easier, it takes less fuel to actually land on Minmus than landing on the moon. Now we're coming straight down, and this is about the time when I start realizing, hey, I'm still moving across the surface. So if you click where it says orbit in the nav ball, it'll change over to surface, and then you can see I'm not really, the retrograde vector is not pointed straight up anymore. straight up being that central point in the blue area of the nav ball. So I point my heading kind of past the retrograde vector and then give it just a little bit of throttle, and it will kind of push it back up towards the center. Now, I like the concept of pushing my retrograde vector in the direction that I want it to go. Since most of my navigation at this point is going to be focused on the nav ball, and during my descent, if your heading is exactly on the retrograde vector, it doesn't move at all, but it can never be perfect. So it's inevitable it will wander off a little bit. And if it wanders off to the left, maybe, and I want to push it right, I'm going to need to put my heading a little more left of it so that it will push it to the right. So I'm looking at my shadow right now. That's something, just a quick glance up every now and then from the nav ball to kind of get your bearings. That's a good thing to do from time to time. So my focus right now is mostly on the nav ball, and I'm checking my speed, and I'm also glancing up to see how close am I to the ground. The speed is probably the most important thing. You don't want to be going too fast because you're going to smack into the ground, and you don't want to be going too slow because then you're going to be wasting a lot of fuel just taking your time going through down to the surface. But I usually go in steps of 20 meters per second. So up, when I was higher, I was about 40 meters per second, and then I just dropped it to 20, and now I can see definition in my shadow. So I'm getting close. So I'm going to be keeping it around 10 meters per second. And when you get slow, that's when you can see the retrograde vector wandering off, and kind of have to work, like go past it, push it back to the middle. So I'm keeping it in the middle, and anything probably 10 meters per second or below is fine for landing on. If you want to kind of finesse it and make it real nice, you can go slower, like I'm trying to make this a nice landing. So 3 meters per second is very gentle, and there we go. We, like a feather touch landing. All right, so we made it to the surface. Now we can do some science. So with our material bays, we don't want to reset any, so we'll pick a couple that are already that are still closed, and do some materials research and keep the data. Take the other one, keep that one. And now for the goos, do some goo observations. Find two that are not used yet. Keep those. And for the crew report, so we can transmit that thing. And now we will take our Kerbal out on an EVA. And before we drop them, we can do an EVA report while still on the ladder, and we get the in space just above Minmus, but we get the biome that we're on. So I guess this would be the Great Flats. So now he's back in there, and I always have a problem taking him out. I don't know why it does this. It kind of blinks. Like I don't know where to put my mouse, and I'll get it there, and it'll just get this blinking thing. And when I click the mouse, it's like it was an off blink, and you can see right there I clicked too many times and I reset it. So okay, finally we get the EVA. And so now we get to take Jebediah out, and we're gonna jetpack around. This is kind of nice. It's very slow going and floating around, very easy. Base building on Minmus is especially fun. Can get kind of the bigger things down on the surface a lot easier, and then these nice flat regions, are really good for, you don't have to worry about things tipping over. So now we'll get our surface sample and EVA report, keep those, plant a flag. The only downside that I've seen to being on Minmus is when you try to bring rovers over to Minmus. They have a tendency to not track on the ground very well. So you get a bunch of speed going, and then you try to turn it all, and the darn thing will just start flipping. and it'll flip for like 5 minutes before finally coming to rest. So yeah, rover's not too good. Like maybe if you put some rockets on it pointing up, you know, so if you're gonna turn, you could fire the rockets, maybe create a little artificial gravity, and then you could corner a little bit better while you're driving around. I haven't tried that yet, but it sounds like it should work. Too bad, at least in this version of the game, bases aren't really used for anything. So the version we got right now is 20 or 0.23.5 or something like that, right after the NASA asteroid patch. So a cool mod that you can get that kind of makes base building worth it is the Kethane mod, because you can set up a Kethane base around Minmus. And then because of the low gravity, you could go down and mine it on the surface and then easily bring it up to space, and you could make more fuel for other ships going out of the system. Pretty fun. So now we're going to start our journey back, and so we're turning towards 90 degrees again at a 45 degree pitch. It's pretty easy to get out of Minmus's sphere of influence. So I'm going to bring it out to about 30. That's where we started from. And then unfortunately we can't accelerate time until we're past 3,000 meters. So you just kind of have to wait this one out. Now probably the easiest way to do this return trip would be to just not really worry about circularizing at all. Just burn until you leave the influence, because it's not, there's so little gravity on Minmus. And then just get rid of your orbital velocity around Kerbin and you'll just come straight down. So we have gobs of fuel in this, but you know, for this video I'll just go through the motions. I'm not going to set up a maneuver node here at the apoapsis, but I'll get there and I'm going to point prograde, and I'll do a prograde burn until I get roughly circular, and then we'll set up a maneuver node to exit properly. But as you can see, I'm a little bit, my trajectory isn't completely I guess horizontal. It's slightly to the side, and that might make more of a difference if Minmus had more gravity, but it doesn't. And we have so much fuel in this that we could make a lot of mistakes, or even go the wrong way and still have enough to correct. So here's my maneuver node. I'm setting it up so when I eject, I'll be going in the opposite direction around Kerbin, so the periaps will be coming in a little ways. The speed that I'll have after I eject from Minmus's sphere of influence will go into slowing me down a little bit in terms of Kerbin's orbit. I actually mess up a little bit here, since I want to land on the light side of Kerbin, and right now I'm not really paying attention to where the light side is. I'm just ejecting in the correct direction so that I'm slowing myself down a little bit. But it turns out, like if you look at this, or to zoom out a little bit, if I were to, when I eject, I'll be close to the apoapsis here, and if I were to bleed off my speed, I'll be coming down in the dark. And when you want to do your retrograde burn to come into Kerbin, you want to be as high as possible. That way, your speed is low. So as you notice my orbital speed as I'm coming around, I'm going to need to do a burn at the periapsis, which is in this orbit is going to be the fastest I'll be going, and not quite the best idea, although it's still significantly lower than if I were closer to Kerbin. So I think when I was near Minmus, it was around 200-ish, and now I'm over 400. So I have to burn off a lot more velocity than I would in order to come down in the light. Not really necessary, but you know, for video purposes, make a better video if you can actually see what I'm doing. A better alternative to what I just did would have been to just eject with just enough velocity to leave Minmus's sphere of influence and not like try to slow myself down. Then I would have taken an orbit that was very high and kind of close to Minmus's orbit, and then I could have chosen the point when I actually got there, accelerate time so you get to the right spot, and then and then do the retrograde burn, and I'd be bleeding off like 200 meters per second instead of like over 400. But then again, still not a big deal. When you're close to Kerbin, you know, like in the 80 to 100,000 meter range, you're going like over 2,000 meters per second. Now that's hard to bleed off. So we're high enough and slow enough that it's still, we're gonna have so much extra fuel left. So we lowered the periaps just above the surface, and now we'll just free fall back down. One thing to watch out for though is how much you time accelerate on this point. Because you're going so slow at the apoapsis and going so fast when you get close to Kerbin, if you keep it in like 10,000 or more time acceleration, you could actually completely miss it. Like maybe the calculations for your position are spaced out so much that you'll kind of miss the periaps, and you won't hit the atmosphere at all. You just go skimming by as if Kerbin didn't have an atmosphere. And maybe if your periaps was like in the planet, you might crash. I don't know. I haven't tried that out, but I have totally missed the atmosphere before. Just something to keep in mind. I also like to point retrograde as I'm coming into the atmosphere. It's just a precautionary measure. You know, sometimes like the drag is sort of favoring you to point forward, and also sometimes the parachutes don't give enough drag, at least initially, to flip you around. And if the parachute opens when you're turned the wrong way and it needs to rotate you, usually it rips pieces off of your rocket, and that's not good. Another thing is I turn SAS off because I want to get my heading to be following the retrograde vector. So when I put the parachutes out, it puts enough drag on it to so that it will keep me pointed in that direction. The SAS will keep me rotated to whatever direction I was at. And since I'm kind of falling and my heading's changing as I fall, I don't want the SAS on to be rotating me. And then when those parachutes pop out and I'm not pointed directly, retrograde, then it'll torque me around, and it usually rips things off. And now I'm coming in, and since I'm a little bit heavy with all that fuel, I want to get my velocity down below 6 meters per second. 5.9 works, so I'll give it a little bit of throttle, and I'll just leave it here all the way down until we hit the water. The reason I need to do this in the water is because, at least at the current version of the game, water's more unforgiving than land. And if you exceed the crash tolerance, and you can't slow yourself down with the landing gear, you're going to break stuff. So we'll recover the vessel, and we'll be presented with all the science points that we earned from this mission. So you can see plus 676.5 and a total of 1,295. So actually, we've got a little bit more in this from the moon mission, and the reason for the 1,295 is because I haven't spent any of the science points from the moon mission. And you can use this Minmus trip in place of the moon mission, since it's the same tech from the moon. And actually, you get a little bit more science this way. And that's going to wrap it up for this mission and this video. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.